sound, haptic feedback, all paired with an accompanying animation on the glyph matrix. It's very satisfying. And then I would only say there's one thing that is actually very useful. The ability to use this second screen as a preview for your rear cameras to take full quality selfies. But then if you think about it, what I'm really saying is that the best feature of the glyph matrix is something that every past phone that's had a second screen has already been able to do better. There are also improvements to essential notifications. You know what I was saying, how you can set a few contacts or a few types of message that you deem important enough to give you a notification when your phone is flipped over. Well, now you can also assign a profile picture specific to each of those contacts. But yeah, you can see why it doesn't actually fix the problem. That even if, let's say, I can see their picture, so I know from the back of my phone whether it's Jeremy or David, there's still a very wide range of messages that each of those contacts could be sending me. So I've still got to fully check the message myself on the front of the phone to decide if what they've just sent is one of the important ones. So really, the two most unique things about this phone, the design and the glyph matrix, not in love with either of them. And I don't think either is a very good reason to get this over an iPhone or a Samsung. So then, really, the only way that I recommend this Phone 3 is if it just straight up beats those other phones in hand-to-hand combat, in terms of the phone fundamentals. So, let's start with the red flags. The chipset that nothing has gone for is the Snapdragon 8S Gen 4, which is not the very highest end Snapdragon 8 Elite that Samsung uses. Plus, no real mention of any kind of advanced cooling system. So, while nothing has been pretty good so far at always picking the sensible middle ground chip and doing a lot of software work behind the scenes to get the most out of it, there's no way that it doesn't get absolutely mowed down by Samsung in a head-to-head. We're talking 30 to 40% performance lead to Samsung. So, like, if you're into graphically intensive phone games, then that already writes this off for you. The other one is the display. So this is very much a flagship screen in terms of color reproduction, in terms of brightness. Fantastic. The screen has exactly the same pixel density as the iPhone 16, so it's incredibly sharp. The only thing is Nothing's display relies on slightly cheaper LTPS tech, as opposed to the LTPO on Samsung and most Android phones at this price. Which means that while Samsung can dial its refresh rate all the way down to 1 Hz, this can only go as low as 30. So in practice, that doesn't actually make the display look any worse, it'll just be a bit of a hit to battery life. But this is where things start to turn around. Because even with that hit, I think it's pretty safe to say that the Nothing Phone 3 will still outlast an iPhone 16 or a Samsung Galaxy S25. The Phone 3's battery capacity is 5,150 mAh, which compares quite well to Samsung's 4,000. Now on one hand, it's a bigger phone. Of course it has a bigger capacity. The Phone 3 is actually more similar in size to the S25 Plus, which has 4,900 mAh. But then the S25 Plus starts at $999, so I feel like it makes more sense to compare this to what Samsung gives you at this $799 price. And if you do that, I would expect the Phone 3 to outlast them pretty significantly. I used the Nothing Phone 2 for quite a while. The battery life there was outstanding, and everything about this phone makes me think it is going to last pretty much as long as that. Longer if all you were doing was surfing and watching YouTube and not pushing that chip, but then back to being about the same if it's mixed usage, including some demanding stuff like camera and gaming. Now there is one weird thing, which is that this same phone is being marketed as having 5,500 mAh of battery in India. So just to address that, no, they haven't created two different versions of this with different dimensions and different weights. It is actually the same battery inside. It's just that there's a software limitation being put on it in this country and many other countries, because if the battery capacity goes above a certain amount, then it becomes classed as a dangerous good, which can make your shipping costs go crazy. The end battery life you get should be the same. This is more just the semantics of how it's being presented. And so, you shouldn't be having battery problems, especially since the phone can charge with 65 watts of power compared to Samsung's 25. The Phone 3 has dual speakers, and I mean, at least based on my very early first impressions, they're not spectacular, but they're decent for a flagship. They're not quite as rich as the ones on iPhone or Samsung. But software is where this becomes a little bit more of a unique offering. So the Phone 3 runs Nothing OS 3.5, basically a very slightly tweaked version of the Nothing OS you've already seen, which is essentially a mostly untouched version of Android, with the only changes being purely aesthetic. I do think though, while it's very difficult to compare it to Samsung's One UI, which is immensely more customizable, I do think that Nothing's OS is one of the best ways to experience Android. I like the fact that your icons aren't screaming for your attention. There are some parts of the UI which are quite unconventional and, in my opinion, just very beautifully laid out. And the biggest thing, it's completely bloatware free. The only actually unique features of Nothing OS are Essential Space, which to me feels like a somewhat half-baked way to keep track of all the things that you need to remember, with a bit of a learning curve when it comes to understanding it. And then the thing that is completely new this time, Essential Search, which is swipe up from the bottom of your screen to be able to quickly get to anything. So the idea is very similar to your phone's universal search, but it's just a little bit broader. Like, it can solve maths problems directly on device in that search box. And if you ask questions, it'll use a tweaked version of Gemini AI to give you an answer that's specifically designed to be short, you know, for those random quick lookups. It's a good idea. I'm all about having to go into each app less because one app does more. One thing Nothing has definitely done better this time around is their update promise. It's now 5 years of major Android upgrades and 7 years of security